Hello, I'm Karen Stathoplos, and today I'm going to be reading you an excerpt from a book by Ruth Reichl called Garlic and Sapphires. She's a wonderful food writer in general. She wrote Comfort Me with Apples, Tender at the Bone. And this book describes her experiences when she moved from Los Angeles to New York to become the food critic. And unfortunately, her picture was plastered all over the pages, and she wanted to go to restaurants anonymously. So this describes many of her festive adventures, dressing up, becoming costumed as someone else so no one would know who she was. I realized that the remedy was simple. If every restaurant in New York knew what I looked like, I had to look like someone else. I even knew the person who could show me how to do it. As soon as the plane landed in New York, I went to a phone booth and called Claudia Banks. In her prime, Claudia had been a famous acting coach. She'd been retired for many years, but she instantly agreed to help me create a disguise. "Oh, my darling," she said in her smoky British accent, "what a wonderful idea. I shall meet you directly." Of all my mother's friends, Claudia had always been my favorite. She exaggerated everything, smoked like a chimney, and told wonderful stories about the people she had known in what she called in a long, slow drawl, the theater. "I have an idea," said Claudia, her voice rich as velvet, steeped in mystery, and vibrant with dramatic possibility. "I know who you must now become." "Who?" I asked. "Your mother. We shall turn you into your mother." A shiver went down my back, and I found I was unable to speak. Undaunted by my silence, Claudia continued, "It will not be difficult. Have you noticed how you're beginning to resemble her?" "No," I said shortly. "I don't look the least bit like her." "You do indeed," Claudia insisted. "A short silver wig, a few wrinkles, a bit of makeup. Nobody notices old ladies. It will be extremely effective." My mother's blue silk dress fell over my shoulders and settled against my hips with eerie perfection. I wrapped myself in a robe and sat down to let Denise, the makeup artist, work her magic, keeping a wary eye on Claudia, who was slumped alarmingly into her seat. "Are you all right?" I asked when Denise's work was nearly done. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." "I have," said Claudia, going even paler. "I suggested this, but I was not expecting the transformation to be quite so dramatic, with the dress, the jewelry." I had found the dress in the back of my mother's closet after she died, hanging between the fake Pucci shifts and the jackets from Lohmann's. The scent of joy still clung faintly to the fabric. It was beautifully cut, with a straight skirt and a high neckline, and Mom had worn it for years. Denise had painted my short nails with the deep blue-red polish my mother always used. "Look," she commanded, whirling the chair to face the mirror. "My God," was all I could muster. And then we all went silent, staring at the reflection. Claudia had been right. I had never noticed the resemblance, but if you dressed me up in my mother's clothes, hid my hair beneath a silver wig, and covered my face with wrinkles, I turned into a virtual replica of Miriam Brudno. I am nothing like my mother. No one is. She was a commanding figure who did not have a timid bone in her body. Frank, fearless, and totally tactless, she was a woman who said what she felt, did what she pleased, and let the chips fall where they may. Having spent most of my life being embarrassed by Mom, I was shocked to discover how easily I slipped into her shoes. Finding out that it was fun was even more frightening. Becoming my mother was like getting cosmic permission to abandon my superego, act without considering the consequences, behave badly. It wasn't me, after all, doing these bold things, but it gave me an extraordinary sense of exhilaration. "What are you doing?" asked Claudia, her voice rising when I went to the phone. Making a reservation, I said. My mother never walked. She advanced upon the world as if she were an invading army intent upon conquest. My rhythm, I found, had changed too. When Mom made calls, she punched the numbers into the phone as if the very pressure would speed the connection. And I was punching now. "But this was just a dress rehearsal," wailed Claudia. "We're not going out tonight." "Oh, yes, we are," I heard my voice saying. "I'm all dressed up and I want to go out." I punctuated this by thumping my foot firmly onto the floor. "Right now. I've always longed to go to 21. Tonight's the night." "I am certain you must have some other friend who would like to go to dinner with you," Claudia said. "I'm sure I do," I said, "but I don't want to wait. I want to do it right this minute. We're going to go to 21, and we're going to spend a great deal of money. We'll have cocktails. We'll have caviar. I've already made the reservation. Put your coat on, dear. We're going out." My mother had been an irresistible force. Feeling her inside me, I swept Claudia up and propelled her out the door, paying no heed to signs of resistance. Claudia, once inside, the maitre d' led us inexorably toward the dim reaches of the rear. Claudia snuffled unhappily. "This must be the worst table in the entire room," she noted when the maitre d' finally came to a halt. She was right. What would Mom do? I surveyed the situation. "We need a martini," I decided, and let my mother take charge, waving my hand imperiously to summon a waiter. When he finally materialized, I firmly delineated our requirements. "Gin," I said, "dry, with olives, shaken if you please, not stirred. I like them very, very cold." Eating out with my mother was a terrible trial. Soup was never hot enough. Meat was always too well done. Salads were overdressed or underdressed or served at the wrong temperature. She sent everything back. Each time Mom went into her routine, I wanted to crawl under the table, but here I was in a restaurant with her once again, and this time I was enjoying it. I watched the waiter approach with the martini and noted with a kind of glee that it was not in the distinctive triangular glass. Suddenly, I heard my mother's voice issuing from my mouth. "Martinis," it said, "never taste as good when they are served in wine glasses, but that can't be helped. But this one isn't cold, and that can. Take it back, please, and fetch me a cold one." The waiter started to give me a "who do you think you are" look, but I swept him with one of my mother's queenly glares, and he changed his mind. "Yes, madam," he said. Claudia watched this with bewildered fascination. I said, "I think I'll have a Caesar salad and steak tartare. They'll both have to be made at the table. That should be entertaining." The waiter did his best to make us understand his limited interest in two old ladies. "You don't want that," he said curtly when I ordered the steak tartare. "It's raw." This was extremely unwise. "I do indeed," I told him, "but only if the meat is hand-chopped. Please inform the chef that if he tries to send me tartare that has been turned to mush in a food processor, I will send it straight back." "Yes, madam," he said for the second time. Next, we had to endure the sommelier's condescension. "Ponzo Reserve Pinot Noir," he intoned in a slow, lugubrious voice. I had deliberately ordered one of the least expensive wines on the list. He sighed loudly. "Very well, madam." Mournfully, he shuffled off. I watched him go with a look my mother had perfected, one that did not bode well for the next person approaching the table. That turned out to be the waiter with a tray of oysters. "Oh," I said as he set them on the table. "Malbec," I sniffed. "You can't eat these," I announced to Claudia as I summoned the waiter. "They've been out of the water too long." Then I dipped an exploratory spoon into my lobster butternut squash bisque, noted that it was thin and sweet, and took another bite. No soup was ever hot enough for my mother, and this was no exception. Once again, I summoned the waiter. "Tepid soup is not worth eating," I told him. "Please take it back and do not return until it is steaming." When he made the Caesar salad, the mom and me decided that he had overdone the anchovies. "I'm so sorry," I said sweetly, "but it's a bit fishy. Would you mind making me another?" He glared at me. Then he cleared the plate and recommenced the operation. "Stop!" I cried. The waiter came to attention, salad fork in the air. "Are you sure that egg is coddled?" I asked. "Yes, madam," he said. His voice now betrayed exasperation tinged with grudging respect. "It has been cooked exactly 1 minute." "Very well," I said, keeping him under surveillance as he warily mixed the dressing. "Is it to your liking?" he asked anxiously as I took the first bite. I felt one of my mom's triumphant little smiles cross my lips. I inclined my head as she would have done. "Perfectly," I said. "You have outdone yourself." I waved him off and took another bite. "Being an old lady can be very useful," my mother used to say. What I had not known was that, unbeknownst to me, I had absorbed every one of her tricks. The onion rings were cold. I sent them back. There was too much Worcestershire sauce in the steak tartare, and I considered rejecting it. "Don't, I implore you," Claudia pleaded. "This is starting to feel like the second act of The Taming of the Shrew, and it has always made me uncomfortable." Claudia said nothing else, but I understood the look that crossed her face. She wanted to put the poor waiter out of his misery, if only to end her own. The moment we were out the door, I pulled the wig from my head and released my hair from the nylon net. I ran my fingers through my curls over and over, shaking myself out. "Free at last," I said. Claudia looked at me. "Tell me," she asked, "did you actually believe any of those things you said in there?" "No," I said, happy to hear that my own voice was back. "That was all Mom. She made a scene at every restaurant we ever ate in, and it always made me miserable. I'll eat almost anything rather than endure the trauma of sending it back." "If only you had kept that in mind during dinner," lamented Claudia. "I would have preferred to be almost anywhere else on earth." Then she closed her mouth and looked at me, and her shoulders began to shake. Soon, great peals of mirth were rolling down the dark street, and I was laughing with her, although I wasn't quite sure why. "It was rich," gasped Claudia when she had finally stopped long enough to breathe. "Tonight, we scored one for every old lady in New York." If I were being entirely truthful, I would have to admit that I would not have missed that for the world. "I'm glad you feel that way," I replied, "because tomorrow we're going to tackle a more difficult target." "We are?" "Oh, yes," I said. "Tomorrow we lunch at the Four Seasons." As we drew up to the Four Seasons the next day, I turned and said, "Before we go in, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" she asked. "We don't have a reservation." "You failed to make a reservation?" she asked. "May I ask why?" "It's an experiment," I said. "I want to see how New York's most elegant restaurant behaves when two old ladies show up at the door." "But it will be so embarrassing," cried Claudia. "Not to me," I replied. The little disturbances of life held no terrors for my mother. "I certainly wish you had informed me of this plan," said Claudia. "Would you have come?" I asked. "Certainly not." That's why I didn't. "This," she said with a sigh, "feels lamentably familiar." Claudia in tow, I traversed the cool lobby of the Seagram building. I put my foot onto the first step, feeling what my mother would have felt if she had been there. I felt my mother's joy as I swept up the stairs, breathing in the affluent air. With all my mother's confidence, I marched up to the pale, cool man behind the reservation desk. "We have no reservations," I said in my mother's coyest voice, "but we thought you might be able to find a seat in the pool room for 2 old ladies." He glanced down at the scribbled names in a book, and then he looked me over appraisingly. I gave him one of those flirtatious smiles my mother had perfected late in her life, the one that said, "I have lived a rich life, and there are many things I could show you." Our eyes held for a moment, and then he made up his mind. "Of course," he said, "if you 2 young ladies will follow me." And he led us down the hall, past the huge Picasso tapestry, and into the promised land. The maitre d' led us to one of the tables edging up against the square expanse of the pool. I put my hand on the white marble ledge, appreciating its cool smoothness as he pulled out my chair. As I folded myself into it, he said, "Please allow me to send you some champagne." The tone of his voice implied that in accepting, we would be doing him a great favor. "Thank you," I said. The Miriam in me had expected no less. Across the table, Claudia produced a deep sigh of contentment. When the champagne was poured, she picked up her flute, took a tentative sip, smiled, and took another. Our appetizer appeared, a little roulade of silky smoked salmon cleverly wrapped around cream cheese. The frilly green salad on the side was small and adorable, like something that belonged on a fancy Easter bonnet. "Lovely," said Claudia as she pushed her empty plate away. "Truly lovely." "I have something lovelier for you," said a man standing by our table with a plate in either hand. His face was all points, sharp chin, long nose, crescent of hair falling into humorous black eyes that danced with fun. He juggled the plates so that they wiggled suggestively and then set one in front of each of us. "Risotto," he said, rolling the R so that his Italian accent became pronounced. A waiter hovered attentively next to him, holding a tray. "Since you are here at the height of the truffle season," said the man, selecting a gnarled tuber from the tray, "you must celebrate with us." "Truffles," said Claudia. "Oh, truffles, truffles, truffles." As the word came rolling from her throat, it sounded rich enough to eat. "Truffles," she said again in her deep voice, "the most divine food on earth." She watched hungrily as the man began to shave curls of creamy white truffle over the top of her risotto. The aroma was so rich and damp that I was not surprised when Claudia leaned over the plate and inhaled. "Divine," she said again, performing. After the busboy whisked the plates away, the angular man returned. "You cannot leave the Four Seasons without tasting our foie gras," he said, motioning to a waiter who held out 2 small plates. "Tell me how you find the pears as an accompaniment," he continued as the waiter set a plate in front of each of us. Claudia seemed to have gone into sensual overdrive. "To think," she said, taking a bite, "of all the years we did not come here." Her voice was a dirge, a lament for lost meals she might have eaten. When we were finished, the angular man returned, insisting that we taste the restaurant's newest dish, peppered loin of bison. "Just 1 bite," he said. "Oh, just 1 bite," I said, to be polite. I really cannot manage more. But I was enjoying the moment for my mother, thinking how much pleasure it would have given her. One meal like this would have thrilled her for years. She didn't care about food, but she craved this feeling of being special, important, well cared for. She would have enjoyed what she was eating because of the way it was served. And so I took another bite and tasted it. Really, really tasted it with all my mind. The meat was wild, like the steaks of my childhood. It had heft and chew. It tasted like grass and sky and the Wild West. Something strong in my mouth. And suddenly I uttered my mother's classic phrase, the one she used every time she found some food she really liked. "This," I said, "is the best thing I have ever eaten." "Oh, my darling," said Claudia, her eyes filled with tears. "How she would have adored being here." Much more, I thought, than I ever would. And suddenly it came to me what being Miriam, my mother, meant. It had allowed me to experience this meal in an entirely new way. My mother could be difficult, but when she was happy, she was uniquely capable of abandoning herself to the moment. By becoming her, I had shed the critic, abandoned the appraiser who sat at a distance, weighing each bite, measuring each dish. I had originally put on a disguise as a way of fooling the restaurants, but now I saw it was also a way of fooling myself. I had been ready, eager even to know what it felt like to walk in someone else's shoes, and I had enjoyed it. The previous night, I had relished every minute of my obnoxious performance. And now, reveling in the sheer luxury of this lunch, I began to wonder what other disguises were out there waiting for me, and what lessons I would learn from the women I would become.